Welcome everyone. We are starting a fantastic conversation that accompanies the project Here Otherwise. I am Fabrizio Gallanti, the director of rêve, Centre d'Architecture, which is an architectural center based in Bordeaux, France. And the reason why I'm talking to you from Bordeaux, France, is because this project that is actually delocalized and placed everywhere and nowhere was initiated in 2020 within the Saison Africa 2020, which is an initiative of the French government to generate a series of events, a quite consistent series of events all across France, having Africa as its, and you will jump on your chairs, as the invited country, in the sense that every 2 years, France has a special cultural season. It could be Mexico, next year it will be Portugal, and in 2020, the government of France decided that Africa was to be the main guest of this season. Ngone Fall, who is a curator, an architect originally from Senegal, but based in Paris, was charged to be the commissioner for this initiative, and she invited rêve to be the only architectural institution actually to be involved in the process. Therefore, rêve decided to propose to Patti Anori to generate concept, ideas, and initiative within that framework. And Patti will be starting this conversation as therefore somehow expanded the concept in multiple directions, with multiple ideas. First and foremost, with the idea that the project had to be a collective initiative. And I think she will be very much describing why so and how that has happened. So today we are together with the curators of this digital platform that is around the concept and idea of women in architecture from Africa, from the African diaspora. So we have the collective saay, yaas, who has run the show for many months until 2 weeks ago when finally the project has gone online, who then has invited a series of guests to have exactly a kind of exchange around the topics, the concepts, the trends, the tendencies that somehow can be read and can be felt and seen across what is actually not a country, but it's a continent of more than 50 countries, plus a kind of very expanded network of individuals, association, organization all over the planet. We thought somehow in empathy with all the ideas that Anna, Mawena, Patti, and Tulisa has offered to us all over these months to follow their concept. That was this idea of call and response. So this idea that somehow an interesting curatorial project has to be unpredictable because you don't really know where it's going and it's on the base of the reaction that it generates. We thought that for tonight, it could be interesting to again follow this protocol. So what we will be sharing together and what the spectators that are connected with us will be listening is exactly this idea of a threshold of somehow a kind of a rhizomatic conversation of exchanges. So we thought that each participant will respond to a question and later launch a question to another one. So my duty for tonight is almost over. I will therefore address the first question of this exchange to Patti Anori, who I think, correct me if I'm wrong, is talking to us from Cabo Verde. Am I correct? You will maybe it could be great for all of us to mention again from where we're talking, because I also think this positional nomadic kind of condition that we all share is very important to the project. And my question is very simple. My question is, what were the initial thoughts and idea about how this invitation, how this proposal from Africa 2020, from La Saison Africa 2020 was to be addressed? Why a platform and not a physical exhibition? That's normally is what we at rêve have been done for many years. And what has been the main challenges that you have been encountered, and how also you see the project evolving in the future? And before the answer, thank you everyone for being here. It has been a fantastic ride so far. And as the famous curator Hans Ulrich always likes to say, it has only just begun.
Thank you, Fabrizio. I think that was more than one question. But okay, first of all, I'd like to welcome all these wonderful women here sharing the screen with me, and everyone else who's joining us in at this moment, and also Arkan Rev, and definitely especially Ngone Fall for throwing this challenge at me, at us, to take on. I will start by speaking a little bit about the title of this project, Her, Here, Otherwise. I know it's easy to read it as Here, Otherwise, but I think it is important to play on this double entendre or multiple entendre, which has guided also the project in many ways. So it was meant to focus on women, obviously, and also to the graphic of the title itself was also open to connecting it to a position, to be here and to be as a spatial condition, but also as enunciating a presence, as we have been in many ways made invisible in this profession for way too long. So I just wanted to say that we are here, we are her, and we are here otherwise. Given this challenge, and especially with the project, as you mentioned, with France continuing to treat Africa as a country, it's always quite a dilemma to accept these kinds of projects and provocations, because in some ways they perpetuate the very ideas that we're trying to break free of. And in treating Africa as a unit or as a country is something that we all have been, or many of us have been working in complicating that idea. And also as women architects, being a curator and being asked to platform a few women, or having this singular role of the curator who has an all-seeing and all-organizing view was something that I wanted to reject from the onset. So for me, it was important to speak in multiples, and in that way, the first step after conceptualizing at least the title and provoking it and sending it over as a provocation was to invite other women into this position of the curatorial proposition to contribute towards this question. So Anna Bengwe joined, and Tuliza Cindy, and Mawena Yohesi, who's not an architect, but who's an artist, a thinker, a creative person, and many other things. And now is an honorary architect in the group. I don't know if you'll accept it, but we give you that title. So anyway, so back to this strategy, or this very important position of expanding the role of the singular curator was very important, and to speak in multiples was very important. Simultaneously, as I've mentioned, this idea of questioning the single view of Africa as a unit, or as a singular entity, or as a singular concept, was also something that was very strong for us to consider and to think about and to expand on. And for us, including the diaspora and thinkers and people from the diaspora was also another step towards allowing and opening up and expanding the space of thinking about architecture. In addition, we are also simultaneously questioning how architecture has also defined a very singular space, or hasn't expanded further, or how can it expand further. And to finalize, at least for now, why the platform? The platform is to, again, counter the selection process, to counter this idea that we would have this, the power to select only a few women to stage them and platform and platform them into a physical space. It would be impossible to gather every single woman, architect, architecture student, creative, spatial thinker from Africa and the diaspora into a physical space. And thus the platform became, allowed this possibility of expanding the space and of creating space to allow us to come together and think about these issues. I would like to stop talking because I really do want to hear everyone else. Not that you can't come back at me with more questions, but I haven't thought of who I'm going to pass the word to, but I think I'm going to follow the natural process, which was that I then called my dear friend of many decades and colleague Anna Bengwe to join me in this endeavor. And I'll pass on the word to her, not with a question, but with a profound gratitude for her presence in my life and in accompanying me in questioning what architecture means and what it means to do architecture as an African woman. So there you go, Anna. I'm not gonna cry, but I am. Wipe my tears, girl.
That's all right, I'll cry for you. Thank you, Patty. That's very, very sweet. And thank you for speaking so eloquently about the project. And thank you for bringing me into the project. It started really, I was just going to, Patty's my friend, as she said, and I was just going to be a sounding board, really, and just kind of listen, what she wanted to do. And the project just grew and grew and grew, and it became huge. And I was completely sucked into it, which I'm very happy to say happened. That was not the intention. And it's been an absolutely fascinating journey, really. If we have a complete record, actually, of our conversations right from the beginning, including Patty and my conversations. And then as Tulisa joined, and then as Mawena joined, and the conversation just, morphed and transformed when their voices came into it. And it just went, I think, in directions that none of us could have ever anticipated. At some points, quite overwhelming. At some points, just completely rewarding. At some points, fascinating. At some points, frustrating. But an incredible journey. And I do feel, as Fabrizio said, it really is just, even though we've come to this point, it really is just sort of almost a point of departure for whatever might come next. And I do just sort of want to return compliments to Patty that for having this vision in the first place, or even having the vision to want to expand the curatorial role conceptually, which I think was, it's not only extremely generous, it's also, I think, a little bit unusual. I mean, curatorial roles are quite coveted in the art world, as far as I can tell. So I think this sort of generosity of spirit and generosity of intellect to expand this role, not only to do that, but to actually see what, to sort of put trust in that process, which is, I think, I really want to thank you for that. To have trust in the process and to put trust in the process, because really none of us had ever entered this kind of process before, and we had no clue what could come out of it. So I really thank Patty for sort of leading the way in that sense of saying, look, I have trust in this, and I'm trusting you guys with this process. And then to also have the vision for wanting to create this platform for women architects to be able to gather across the entire continent and the diaspora, which I know that Patty has had this idea for quite a while. And then when this position was offered to her, she was able to see, again, it takes a certain sort of ability to see the opportunity inherent in this, which a lot of people would not. So I really want to, congratulate us for for you choosing us, and to also just want to acknowledge and recognize, that, because it's really the genesis of everything that happened. And also just the whole, you led us through this process. It may not have felt like you did at times. when we had those, 5-hour conversations where we had no idea what we're doing. But it was always there. And, it was always not always so obvious, but it was always there. There was always a kind of sort of eyes on the prize demeanor, that was always present. And I think that everybody noticed that, and everybody benefited from it. And I think it kept us going on. It allowed us to sort of be able to distinguish certain paths through this, which was not always easy, because there was always different directions that we could take, and it's often very difficult to see which is really, the right path. And on top of that, it was just a whole load of fun. So I thank you for that too, for your sense of humor. And that's deeply appreciated and very, very necessary. And I think that, again, as Patty says, we're so close to this, that we, in some ways, we don't really have the distance to be able to give a sort of fair assessment of it, or even to give, a fair assessment of the impact. And that's really, for me, what I'm most interested in, particularly from this first group of very brave women who submit their work for being the first group on the platform, which we really appreciate that. And very much want to hear from you how this might impact you, what you see the impact being, what you, how you view this, your critiques of it, everything. We really need to sort of see it from a fresh perspective and from fresh eyes. So in terms of calling the next person, really it's open for me. I think I will call on Hauhelo. And I would like her to speak to, as I've said, to speak to the impact. First, if you could tell us a little bit about yourself, Hauhelo, and where you sort of are in your life right now. So I think you're at quite an interesting point where you were recently a student and you're now, emerging in your career. So if you could speak to your impressions of what has been created, what sort of impact you feel it might have on yourself personally, and on the discourse, and on the discipline, and on practice, if you think that it might even begin to achieve a smidgen of the ambitions that are inherent in this idea, and anything else really that you would like to comment on.
Okay. Thank you, Anna, for your question, and thank you so much for the invite. I feel very honored to be able to submit my work and even just be able to participate in this panel. I'm not sure if you can all hear me. Okay, great. So I think with a panel like this really allows an open collaborative sense in that we, as Black women going into architecture, it's very difficult, especially depending on where you're coming from. It's difficult to access education and to access generally the realm of architecture. And not only that, but also to understand with all the issues that we kind of have in where we're coming from, to be able to represent that or to be able to express that. So I'm coming from Mpumalanga. It's a village in in Mamitlake. It's a village in Mpumalanga in South Africa. I grew up here and moved to Johannesburg for high school to study art, and then went to UCT and then later to GSA. So I just graduated from UJ in 2019. So it's just recent. And I've gotten to now go into the working realm. And I think also transitioning from coming from university and into the workspace can be quite a big transition, especially when you have so much ambition as to the kind of expressions you want to kind of take out, or all the kind of issues that have been suppressed. And I say this because there's a lot of issues in terms of where we come from, where you kind of want to express it in architecture. And it can be difficult when you're going into universities that don't reciprocate that. So having a platform like this, it kind of allows one to have access to knowing that there's a possibility, to reach and to get access to the imaginaries. And that's why I even just wanted to be a part of it, because I had quite a big difficulty trying to be able to talk about injustice spaces, or spaces where women are seen as being invisible or and displaced. So being able to be in spaces where like you have the ability for your work to express that is really important. And not just for me, but I also think for any other young females that look like me, that look like us, that want to go into that realm. So I really enjoy it, and I think it will have such a great impact. And I found it was so important for me to participate, not just for myself, because I think it also there's a sense of validation in saying that you know, there's people out there who are able to hear your word, and there's people out there who are able to receive your story. And, you know, I feel like this is a space where a lot of Black women are able, and their stories can be received, no matter where or how rough or how unrefined they are, or how ugly it is, but it can be kind of accepted and kind of pushed into being in spaces like this all together, and being able to communicate and have dialogue on how we can move forward. Yeah, so thank you very much for this platform and for the question. I hope I answered it. This is...
Well, thank you, Hahalo. It really, there's no right or wrong. You're not in school anymore. So that was the perfect answer. And so what we'd like to ask you to do now is call on somebody else in the panel with a question or a statement or a provocation that you would like to put to them. And then we will go around like that. So if you could do that, please.
Okay. I'd like to pose a question to Lisa. I think also just knowing that you're in the impact that you have just in GSA and in your unit and in academia, I want to just ask how you feel students are able to kind of push themselves or allow themselves to express themselves in such a way, or express their work or create work that can allow them to speak about the unjust elements or things that happen in their lives, and how architecture can help that, and how even this platform could help that. Yeah.
Thank you, Hafna. Well, firstly, it's really incredible to have, you know, all of us here as a panel, and I feel really honored. I'm incredibly proud of Yaas and, you know, the milestones that it's hit regarding where it's arrived. And I think I first want to perhaps start by echoing some of what Anna said about this process, and to also maybe touch on some of the initial thinkings and conversations that Patty and I have had over the years that even instigated this and the ways that I reflect on it in how I teach. I think what Patty's been incredibly consistent about is making sense of what platforming means. And I think maybe something we have in common is that we're both a bit allergic to platforms. Even as I sit here, my heart's racing, I feel overwhelmed. And it's just something that generally remains a seriously unnatural thing. And I've always found that really strange, especially considering the idea that, you know, even when presenting something that is completely my own, when positioned in a certain kind of platform that orients itself to a certain gaze, I feel even foreign to my own work. I feel foreign to my own voice. I feel foreign to my own thinking. And so that's been something that's been a strong inquiry for me. And it's something that's really overlapped with Patty's questions as well. And some of the ways that we started to interrogate that in establishing the platform was in making sense of briefs. So how we are called, how we are asked to presence ourselves, on what terms. And it's inherently about what ground is established, you know, so what collective references are deemed as important and significant as a way to think about something and then enter it. And so a lot of the initial inquiries had to do with making sense of how to ask, what we ask, why we ask it, to who we ask. And so that, I think, stirred up quite a lot of inquiries into ideas of how we localize ourselves, how we ground ourselves, how we enter. And I think that those overlapped also with, you know, the ways that we are perceived as the continent, you know, seeing ourselves as this kind of generalized terrain, as opposed to incredibly specialized and individualized places, and not individualized in the Western sense. And so it's been, I think, really interesting to really presence ourselves through the process. So even, you know, the initial processes that we underwent, you know, the 5-hour conversations, and those were recorded as significant working processes, design processes, you know. And so we recorded those because we could reflect back and interrogate ourselves and revisit our own thoughts, revisit the things we felt insecure about saying out loud and so on. And that I found was a really beautiful process. I don't think I've experienced a design process that way before. And also, I must admit, sometimes it was really overwhelming because I think, and maybe this is something that overlaps with our experience as architects, the sense of structure and understanding structure. I mean, we literally create structure and form. To collapse those purposefully is a terrifying thing. So it has been a challenging process, and challenging in the sense that it has literally challenged us to interrogate ways of working, to interrogate ways of showing up, and then to also interrogate ways of enabling others to show up. And I think that very, very strongly overlaps to the ways that I make sense of teaching. And part of that has to do with how I order what I ask. And so for me, just, you know, personally, it's been incredibly important to firstly center ourselves and to work from there. And that's about working at the one-to-one scale. It's about trusting and believing the body and what the body remembers and how the body perceives space and walks in the world and navigates the world. And trusting that that's a language in itself. And it's a language that can be mined, and it's a language that can be given language outside of itself. And then from there to make sense of the things that start to establish more meaning at greater scales. Where I think, at least historically for me, my experience of learning, I often felt like I somehow can never be a reference in my work. that I inherit, you know, a way of thinking. I inherit from the kind of knowledge gods, the canon creators, and I, you know, and then it's my task to be able to replicate it, to sustain those systems, and to, in a sense, maintain and sustain it. So, yeah, I think fundamentally, perhaps my orientation shift has been about asking what it means to start it yourself, and to suspend any sort of judgment about, you know, navel gazing or being too self-referential, just, you know, temporarily, to allow yourself to start from where you are, from your hunches, from your instincts, from what you know to be true, even if it might not necessarily have a language in the architecture discipline. And from there to make sense of what language is forming, almost, you know, as a way to make sense of what is insisting on existing outside of you as a language of space, as a language of meaning. And so, yeah, it was a really interesting way to work those questions through this online platform, and in this way, which I don't so much call a collective, because it felt like we operated so much in community. And I make the distinction, I'm not even sure I can really formulate why it feels so different, but it really did feel different. It didn't necessarily feel like it was a kind of professional gathering on the terms that, you know, it's a series of professionals that come with this this kind of fundamental output aim, and we fulfill the task, and that's great. A significant aspect of it was first about making sense of one another, making sense of what we come with, why we come with those inquiries and those obsessions, and then making sense of how those start to reflect in the work that we do. So I think on the one hand, it feels a bit like an overwhelming question to, you know, be asked how to get that level of authentic practice out of students, because I think I'm also forming that for myself constantly. But it's something that I always think about, definitely in my practice of teaching, that I think really strongly overlapped with this process. I feel incredibly fortunate to have been able to explore these questions in this other form. Yeah, I also want to deeply thank Patty, as well as Anna, as well as Mawena. Again, I haven't worked in this way before, and it was an incredible experience. And I didn't complete the journey with the team, unfortunately, but they were also incredibly generous and understanding in why I couldn't complete the journey, and they've remained incredibly generous. And so it's incredible to be here, and it's incredible to share my reflections on the process. And what I really strongly believe in about the platform is that also to our questions around ideas of archiving, ideas of, you know, what we kind of put up as any kind of standard and so on, the ways that we've really made sense of collapsing those, so that, you know, the kind of ranges of thought and practices that exist, that are ongoing, and that really matter, you know, in intimate scales as well as, you know, at global scales, that they fundamentally have an opportunity to exist in this collective and shared platform, where we're able to then form new connections, form new potential collaborative marriages. And that's an incredibly exciting possibility that the platform presents us with. So very exciting. So I'd like to pass on my question to Mawena. I'd like to know how your experience has been working with architects, because I find you quite a spatial thinker in nature. I think you stepped into that so beautifully. But then on the other end, you know, you would bring your vast, you know, experience in these other mediums of representation and of vocabulary that is incredibly commendable. And so, yeah, I think I'd like to throw out that question to you around how you were negotiating these different disciplines simultaneously, because I really do believe you're practicing within those different disciplines simultaneously.
Wow, what a question. Thanks everyone again. I think it's going to be a kind of a thankful, I don't know, reunion in a way, but it's super, super important to say thanks. And yeah, really, what an adventure, but I'll go back to that. So how was it to work with architects? Actually, it's interesting because that might be my next question. What is architecture in a way, and to which extent do we limit or understand this discipline as well? And I think that that was also one of the challenges inherent to the proposal, also to maybe have a multiple or a demultiply the way we address what architecture is. So I don't know, it's been really interesting because as you both described the process, I came in a second time in a way. Patty and Anna had already started thinking. To this I came also, and I was a bit like the last one to jump in. And it was super interesting. I think I was super intimidated at the beginning. I think that the very first meeting was super intimidating because there is this kind of idea about architecture, this big bossy discipline where everything is so rigid because it is both at the meeting of the art. So you have, oh, wow, those people are amazing. They're so creative, but they're also engineers, you know? Oh my God, they're super, super badasses. They know how to make things work and not collapse. But at the same time, they're also a little bit politician, you know? Because all of a sudden they have to negotiate with the state, with a lot of different stakeholders. So you have this idea of architecture really being this kind of, I don't know, the highest discipline of all in the same time. But when I came, and it was really interesting, I really met you guys as persons. And that was really, really interesting. And I'm thinking back also about those 5 hours conversations, but those conversations were really chit chats in between friends to be or something like that. But at the same time, it was work, but work on a very more, I don't know, artistic way, the way I'm used to doing work. You know, artists never work, but they always work. And this kind of, I don't know, easygoingness in the exchange was really what made me super confident in better understanding also the platform. Because something that was really important to avoid, I think, was to make just a kind of calendar or, you know, kind of book with all, African female architects and just have a list of people doing this and a list of people doing that. And even having that list would be amazing, but it wasn't really the point. The point was, how do you keep this kind of trust? I think, Anna, you talk about trust. How do you have this kind of generosity when we were talking about Patty? But also, how do we have this kind of accuracy, this safe space? And this is what you were saying also to this, how do I feel confident enough, not just to remain impressed by the discipline, to remain impressed by the context, the Africa 2020 context. How do I not, kind of, I don't know, bow a little bit like that and just stand up and show up and be confident with no matter what, it's going to be interesting because we're doing something. And this was really, I think to me, one of the biggest challenge we kind of came across during the whole process. How do we make it really a place where people can genuinely meet each other, even though it's online, even though it's through the works and through some materials, text, images, sounds, but how do we make sure that this is not just an exhibition, so not just something that you come, consume, and go away with? How do you really make it, I don't know, friction and encounter, etc.? And to me, this is something you brought into Lisa. So it's interesting because you said that maybe you didn't go till the end of that journey, but to me, you definitely did, because you kind of kicked it over also at some point when you talked about this idea of belonging. And I think that this had become a kind of a shift also in the way I would relate to the whole context of Africa 2020 and everything you guys already described, so I will not come back to it. But this idea that beyond the idea of the discipline, or beyond the idea of this kind of really superficial attempt to synthesize all of those people living in Africa, outside of Africa, having a link to Africa, everything was kind of, I don't know, healed by this idea of belonging to each other, belonging to a space, but a space that can be always moving, belonging to friends, belonging to a family, belonging to a certain sense of making a home for someone, or a certain sense of making an artwork, or I don't know. And this was really something that, I don't know where I'm going actually saying all of these things, but I'm just trying to grasp back some of the key elements, or the things that were really key to me. But I don't know, I just feel that within that process, this idea of belonging, from belonging to belonging towards, just became something really, really crucial, even beyond the project, within my old practice, and the way that now I understand what architecture is, if I may say. So yeah, creating belonging spaces, escapes, I don't know, but there's something in within that. And I think I'm just going to shut up now and pass again the conversation. And I would ask, for instance, I don't know, Nzinga, if you wouldn't mind. So I have two questions. So the first one is, would that idea of belonging ring any bell also for you in a way? And the other one is the one I asked, as an architect, could you please tell me what architecture is? Because honestly, I still don't get it. Maybe I don't want to get it, but maybe I can ask you that also.
Thank you very much, Mawena. I get to have the $1 million question. I'm not sure I'll answer it, you know, but somehow I think try to just contribute to the conversation, and I think expanding the field. And I must also, you know, start with you know, I think more than thanks, just say how refreshing it has been to have to be in conversation, you know, first with Patty and then with all of you present here, and having a platform like Her Otherwise, I think allows us to show up as ourselves. And I think that's very key, because in the sort of realm or just general discussions, you know, even outside of architecture, that can center Black women, there can be a sort of sometime pressure to always act as a collective and not be able to, you know, show and express who we are as individuals. You know, it's almost something that is a privilege, right? To be able to be afforded individuality. And through, I think, the curatorial process of not having a very sort of standardized architectural sort of platform, but just really being able to show up and contribute, you know, anything in any format, whether it's something that inspires us or just be able to showcase our work, because that's what we want to do. I think I found the sort of lack of codification of having to show up in a certain way extremely refreshing. And I think ultimately, I think one of the biggest success of this platform and the reason why I'm infinitely grateful for it. Which sort of speaks, you know, to the first question that you asked about this idea of belonging. You know, for somebody like me, it's something that's always been hard to navigate. I think it's something that is it's in constant state of definition, you know, because of sort of my background and lived experience. I am a Senegalese Cameroonian architect based in Senegal at the moment that grew up in South Africa, originally born in Mozambique, you know, with a name that comes from Angola. The sort of question of where you're from tends to be a bit complicated to navigate, and people always trying to kind of like frame or like anchor me somewhere that sort of like makes sense or sort of, you know, gives me maybe a singular identity when in fact not just for me, but I know for probably everybody, it's very layered. However, I've, for the past 4 years, have been based primarily in Dakar. And that's a very conscious decision that I made. It was important, I think, for me to leave London, to come here. And I do have, obviously, family ties here. I didn't grow up in Senegal. But what I felt that Dakar allowed me to do, and it's actually for a very, very silly reason. This sort of throughout my 20s, almost this realization of what my presence in the world meant, having a Senegalese passport. I kid you not, I spent my whole life traveling with parents that were diplomats, but in the adult age, I realized that the world, you know, I could navigate the world even though I had a certain amount of privilege, but always being reminded that I do so, being an African national, being a Senegalese national. And I think there was sort of this importance to be able to free myself from any sort of administrative burden that would maybe force me to make this a certain type of choices to be able to maintain or justify my presence in another country, because this is the world that we live in, there are borders, etc. And the main reason why I wanted to be in Senegal is literally because it is my passport country. And I needed to be able to have, I think, a certain level of freedom and agency as to what I do. And what has helped me a lot being here is having what I feel is a sense of freedom to not just have to practice in a certain way, which is, you know, before in London meant being employed. That's the only way I could sort of exist and practice as an architect. Whereas ever since I've been able to be here and just buying myself time, and I came here with zero idea of what I was going to do, but I needed to be able to buy that time and agency. And what that has sort of granted me is being able to find and define the type of architecture that I want to do, to be able to explore research, to be able to have this conversation, to be able to teach. It's literally a sort of blank page for me then define what it means to sort of practice. How could I best practice architecture, and how I can sort of bring all the different journeys and learnings that I've done across obviously different countries and cultures, and while being rooted here. You know, my biggest teacher has been this place, and that's what I'm the most grateful for. And in a way, you know, where I'm starting to sort of develop a sense of belonging, which is really just a culmination really of many things that I've been through, but it's only through having the ability to not fit a certain profile, but really, and in that sense, a privilege of, yes, not having to worry about, you know, literally for me anyways, it's the administrative burden was the sort of big one that I felt was limiting. And I think not having that has enabled me to just really thrive and explore. And it's been, every day is incredible. It's super challenging, but at the same time, I feel that I'm weaving myself, you know, as a person and as a practitioner. And what is architecture? I think the way that I'll go about it is knowing that depending on where you are, there is, I think, a need to sort of define what is it or what it means to practice architecture. Because I'm existing in a country where I officially got the title of an architect only last year. And in doing so, I realized that I was the 240th registered architect in the history of Senegal. There are buildings everywhere, there's architecture everywhere, but it will be very limiting to understand it in a way that is sort of like, you know, codified and institutionalized, because by doing so, I think you miss a lot of opportunities to really sort of learn and engage and sort of even spread knowledge and ideas. So the role, particularly of an architect here, is something that I honestly, every single day is evolving. You cannot sort of camp yourself on the textbook definition and on laws, even though they are there and they regulate sort of what we do. It's always ever changing, you know. To be an architect means to be a sort of planner, a psychologist, to be able to find how to relate to people. I think most importantly has been where I've grown the most, you know, on top of also existing in a field in which everybody has to contribute to it. You don't hold as an architect the ultimate authority of knowledge, you know, of planning. You are in a state of constant exchange. You cannot even assert only just your authority because of this title. You have to build with people. You have to build with the context, with all the limitations, you know, that are here. Just work through that. So there is nothing that sort of prepares and train you for it in that sense. There isn't a school on how to be a Senegalese architect. So you sort of weave that day by day. And I appreciate that, you know, like I say, as challenging as it can be, I appreciate that. And it gives me a great sense of joy, comfort, and knowing that, you know, I will dedicate the rest of my life to keep expanding and just learning. Yes, I don't know, again, how much that answers the question. That's what I wanted to contribute. And if I may, because this is something that, you know, for the younger me and for the, you know, people that I mentor or students that I teach, you know, especially the Black young women, what I would like for, let me say, Christine, for instance, to be able to tell me is in which way do you feel empowered as an architect or as a person? And also, how do you best show up as yourself in the work that you do, if that makes sense. Thank you.
Thank you. Let me think about that question. So how do I feel more empowered, right? That was the first question. I think that, like you said, architecture is such a complex career. You really have to be everything, the psychologist, the philosopher, the planner, the everything. And I feel like connecting to people and talking from Haiti also, exactly like Senegal, well, Haiti in general, we have actually registered 500 architects, but we have a active 80 architects for 13 million inhabitants. So you can see how it's really disequal. So the architecture is all around us. It's informal, it's everywhere. And how can you formalize it? And I think this is the biggest question. So what empowers me is being able to kind of translate a language that nobody knows, that nobody understands, and try to translate it into a space, into a form, and being able to change people's life through this space. And I think this is the most empowering, because at the end, and this is a little cocky of me, you know, this is a little different from saying that we don't know all the answers as architects. I pretend that I know all the answers because, you know, architects are God, but that's a joke that I make. But it's to say that when I talk to my architectural students also, and I'm like, why did you choose architecture? And at the end, I'm like, yeah, you choose the right career, because at the end, doctors, they need to work inside of space, a building. Architecture cures people, right? So we have designs with the right ventilation, with the right illumination, and the right design can change the life or make people feel better, especially in really hard times. So if you're whatever your career is, you need to work inside a space. So architecture designs space to help the community evolve in a whole. So that's the part that empowers me the most. And the second question was, what was the second question again, if you can remind me?
How do you best show up as yourself? You know, in which ways do you feel you can, yes.
That's a question that's very interesting. Actually, I was debating that yesterday. So to put you a little context, I'm gonna do a little storytelling, but very short. So as you can see, like from the news, Haiti has been living crisis after crisis and after crisis. And the biggest crisis we're having now is the oil crisis, where there's no gas available, there's no petrol available for the cars. So every gas station has like 100 cars blocking the way because everybody's trying to get a little gas to put in their car to be able to navigate. So I have a 10 a.m. class at the university. And the thing is, I have to leave the office at 9 so I could get there at 10. So that's 1 hour. And that's enough time, because usually the road is supposed to be 30 minutes, but I give 30 minutes for, you know, if ever something happens. A goat crosses the road or something, you know, the usual. But that day, it was chaotic. It was chaotic. Everybody was in the streets. All the stations were giving gas. So you imagine yourself, 100 cars everywhere. My car, the air conditioning broke down. So I'm sweating like a pig. And I had the great idea to buy these very minimalist waterproof shirts that I thought was very cool, because when water falls on you, it just slips right out. But the sweat stays in also. So I didn't think about that. You need to be careful when you buy stuff. So I'm in this car sweating like a pig. I'm 1 hour and a half late. I'm texting my students to be like, start without me. I'm coming right there. And then I arrive to the class and I am my worst self because I'm tired. My windows were down. There's noise everywhere, fighting to get some space and get in between two cars and finally get there. So how do I getting to the class? And that was a question. It's like, how do you cool down with all this chaos and bring your best self to the class? But I feel like in countries like Haiti, it's very easy, because you look at the faces of the students and you see the future in their eyes, and you see exactly what Patty is giving us right now, a platform. You're giving them a platform for a better future to expose themselves. And from there, you get into the class, and then you switch off this frustration of the whole scenario of the chaos. And you're like, okay, now this is the time where I have to give my best self to you know, be able to work with them, and then give them this opportunity to be me in the future, to be able to give them best selves to the next students and able to empower Haiti in general. So, well, I don't know if that answers the question, but that's the way I feel about the whole process. And to end it, I feel like this is what the platform brings us, is it brings us a space to, like you said, not even be a community, because this is one thing that also as Haitian, we always have been identified with special tags, and it identified to catastrophe, to chaos and everything. But how can I help these students? How can Patty help us be ourselves, like Christine Larac, within this universe of architects and artists? And I feel like this platform helps us get away from all our history, still valorizing it, but at the same time as to show ourselves and our inner emotions or artistic or talent, and not only be attached to the stigma and the stories, the storyline that everybody shows. So that was my answer. I think I'm going to ask the same question. Well, not the same question, but to Gabriela. So Gabriela, feel free to answer how you want. So from your country, so what do you feel are the biggest challenges as an architect to be able to identify yourself or the culture? Yeah, that's the question.
Thank you. I will answer in Portuguese, and Carol is helping me to translate. I feel more comfortable to speak in Portuguese, but thank you. And I understand everything, and it's so, I'm so happy to stay here with all. And falar sobre, eu acho que pensar arquitetura, né, a partir do Brasil, e pensar os desafios para que eu acho que se colocam quando eu penso, né, numa plataforma como essa, ou mesmo no ensino de arquitetura, pensando o quanto que no país existe uma urgência em pensar a arquitetura de uma forma mais larga, mais alargada, embora seja um país de referência também de produção de arquitetura. Carol, you can translate? I think it's better.
So Gaia says she's very happy to be here, very happy for the invitation to participate in this platform. And she says it's very challenging to think about the architecture here in Brazil and the challenges that are put in this sort of way to answer the question of how to think a platform like this and the teaching of architecture in Brazil, since it has the need to be a way to think about it as an amplified and as an expanded way to think as since the country Brazil has the urge, has the need to think about to reflect about the architecture that is produced here.
E pensando, acho, nesse conjunto de arquitetas e artistas convidadas que tem a diáspora ou o continente africano como lugar de partida, né, é muito importante porque, em geral, é um lugar onde, pelo menos nas conversas de arquitetura, o Brasil acaba não se inserindo, né, talvez pela língua, mas também pelo lugar que a arquitetura brasileira, de uma forma mais ampliada, assim, encontra num debate da arquitetura que não encontra, eu acho, com essa conversa, né, diaspórica, né, muitos espaços para se realizar, né, para se pensar.
She says that thinking about this group of architects and artists that has the African continent as the starting spot, it is very important because Brazil many times don't always are inserted in these spaces, and maybe because of the language or perhaps because of the place where the Brazilian architecture is set. So Brazilian architecture is not always found in these places to there are not very many. There are not places for Brazilian architecture to be presented and to think about their production in these places where the African continent is put as the initial spot. I got a bit confused, but did you get what I translated?
I can also add, if you don't mind. Okay. I'm sorry to jump in, but I think that it is knowing Gabriela's work and incredible work that she's doing. But I think it is this double kind of position, right, Gabriela, of Brazilian architecture being so well known from a particular perspective, right? Of the modernist Brazilian architecture, but it's not inserted in discussions, or not as inserted in discussions about its connection to the African world, and it's kind of the incredible heritage and legacies that have connected these two worlds. So it's kind of this double-edged sword of being very well known in the international world of architecture, the Brazilian production, one type of Brazilian production of architecture, but then yet the one that relates to the African continent and to the African heritage being not as visible or not as inserted in this discussion.
Eu acho que um grande desafio assim, é como não pensar essa conversa também que de uma forma que ela se encerre num debate sobre a precariedade, ou sobre 80% da população habita em construções que não são projetadas por arquitetura, né? E eu acho que um grande desafio é pensar para além das interdições, né? Então, acho que pode traduzir isso, Carol, depois eu...
And she said that another challenge is how to not end this conversation talking only about the precarity of the constructions, the self-construction, self-built constructions that are made without the presence of architects. Since in Brazil, we have a percentage of 80% of houses that are built without the architecture presence.
Isso. E voltando para a sala de aula, eu acho que estamos num momento muito particular, onde começamos a ter uma quantidade maior de estudantes negros e negras cursando arquitetura e com interesse em construir essa reconexão, acho que de situar-se enquanto futuros arquitetos ou arquitetas negras, e que seria construir um campo, que seria pensar uma trajetória, né, de atuação profissional que não desconsiderasse isso, mas que não caia na armadilha também de ter sua vida profissional de alguma forma condicionada a responder a um histórico de precariedades.
And she says that taking back the classes, the classrooms, we are in a very particular moment that we have now a bigger presence of Black, female and male students of architecture. They are very interested in constructing and to think of a field and a path of acting professionally that doesn't put away this context, this background that we mentioned before, without and trying to be very sensible without falling in the traps of trying to respond to this historical of precarity of the houses and the way houses are constructed in Brazil.
Acho que me anima muito pensar, então, também a plataforma, né, nos termos que foi criada. Eu acho que coincide também com tentativas, experimentos que temos feito aqui no Brasil, coletivamente, tanto na academia, com o grupo de estudos, Corpo de Estudos do Território, que é composto por esses estudantes que estão acessando a universidade, e a coletiva Terra Preta Cidade, que é um espaço de pesquisa, mas também de criação no diálogo com as artes e outras linguagens para debater e criar sobre a arquitetura.
And she says she's very thrilled to think about this platform in the ways that it's being created and it's being constructed that matches to trials that we have been made in Brazil. We have been made collectively in Brazil in the academia and in the group of studies in the with the help of students. Like the group of study that Gaia coordinates, that is called Corpo, Discurso e Território, Body, Discourse and Territory, that are composed by many of these Black students that access the university. And another example that she gives us is the Coletivo Terra Preta, that is composed by other professionals that are researchers. Some of them are architects and some of them are researchers about the questions and issues of the city.
Então, acho que me parece que tem sido um desafio também pensar a arquitetura a partir de múltiplas linguagens, pensando nas apostas e pensar nessa arquitetura engajada com esse histórico, mas ao mesmo tempo livre, né, para pensar futuros maiores. Eu acho que a plataforma me alimenta muito a partir dos outros projetos a encontrar ecos desses gestos, né, entre os projetos que foram apresentados.
She says to her it's very challenging to think the architecture with these multiple languages and also thinking about the bets that are put in this experience. And in this experience of thinking about an architecture that is sensible with this historical, with this background, and at the same time is free to think wider futures. And she says this platform feeds her very much to help her to develop this project. By the time she is very nurtured with other contents and other projects that has been happening here.
Obrigada. Thank you. I'm the last. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, well, you could pose a question maybe to someone else, and we could go a little bit so that you have a chance to also. Pode colocar uma pergunta.
Eu acho que eu pergunto para a Pati de volta, então. Pensando, eu acho que, talvez pensando no futuro dessa articulação que a plataforma, de alguma forma, né, acionou, acho que várias pesquisadoras, arquitetas potentes em ressonâncias nos projetos, né, e talvez se existe alguma, né, como é que você visualiza, né, da plataforma, as potências da plataforma, né, daqui em diante. E aí acho que você mesma pode traduzir a pergunta. Seu microfone.
Okay, yeah, I said it myself. Gabriela asked, how do I or we see the future of this platform and its resonance in expanding and these connections that have been established here and this network that is being created. I think you asked something else that I don't remember, but I'll answer this one. With something that has been part of our discussions, collective discussions, which is, to what point is the platform ours as the original kind of curators, and to what point do we pass it on to someone else to have its own life or to take over. And this was a strategy that we thought about for a long time, Gabriela, which was, do we allow the platform to be taken over by another group, let's say Terra Preta Cidade, or Coletiva Terra Preta, or Corpo Discurso Território, or anyone else who wants to then transform it and keep it morphing. So this idea of allowing it to grow, change, morph, implode, expand, connect, shift, is something that would be very important to us. Not that only we would take control of it and adjust it, but that it could be something that is then appropriated by many people. For us, this is version 1 or the beta version, and we hope that it expands to allow for other possibilities. I mean, of course, at this point, we kept it as open as possible. We know that was something that guided us, to keep it as open as possible. We know that that's a very difficult task. There's always exclusion in one way or another. Even the fact of being an online platform and not everyone having access to the internet, we are very much aware of how it excludes also. So for us, it'll be very important for it to keep on questioning itself and becoming more and more open. There are also some functionalities of it that we hope to include, which is to really make possible actual connection between the people who choose to show up and who want to share. So there's layers that need to be considered, that we want to consider in the future. And I will pass on the word to my other co-creators to expand on the features of this platform, or how we are beginning to think of it, or how we have thought about it. So I'll pass the word to Mawena. Gabriela, do I need to translate for you, or did you understand? Okay, so I'll pass the word to Mawena.
So yeah, basically I'm just going to repeat what you just said, Patty, but I think that there are, like, I don't know, at least 2 or 3 layers around the platform, which is the philosophical idea that is kind of the, I don't know, the baseline of how do we make a platform, and a little bit of everything we've been sharing for the past hour, really. Then there is really this idea of the development, the coding, the making, the physical making of this digital platform. So as you said, all of the features, all of this idea of the formats are, can we propose a chat room so people can just exchange and not have to say, okay, we're doing this on the platform, then we're going on Zoom, and then, so how do we really, I don't know, give more consistency to that? And then there's also this idea of, yeah, I don't know, being together and hanging out, you know? And I think that this is really the 3rd layer of this idea, because there's work, there's this, all of those, again, all of those conceptual issues and things that we're tackling, that we are appropriating both through architecture, but on more general level, creatively. And then there's also just that genuine pleasure of being all together. And I think that this is also something that doesn't have to end at any point, really, and just say, and of course we're going to fight and blah, blah, blah in life, but it doesn't need to have a kind of a deadline that is, okay, now the project is done and bye. So I think that whatever also the shape of that project will take, and the time, the length it will take to be developed as extensively as we want, I think that this conversation is really, really just has to keep going in a way, because again, it is a meeting. And so then we'll see. So yeah, I don't know. I would pass it to either to Lisa or Anna. I don't know, as you wish.
Anna? Well, I'll jump in. I think maybe one thing I'll add, because I think you've articulated that so beautifully. I remember one of the kind of earlier statements you made, Mawina, about, I think you said something along the lines of being introduced to a place through others, you know, so the ways that they experience where they feel they belong, or where they perceive themselves as local, you know, so how they articulate something as significant, or how they orient your gaze, you know, to prioritize something, or to understand something's meaning, is a beautiful way to also locate yourself through others. I thought that was such a really beautiful kind of view of how we do ground ourselves in places we are not from, in places we might not belong. And, you know, I think it refers to that Haile Selassie talk that we, you know, talked around the ways that we locate ourselves through relationship being one of those things, ritual, which is connected to what happens between those who relate, or who relation, and also restriction. And I also found those incredibly strong. And what I find so beautiful about what the platform starts to enable are those things. So for me, I find it beautiful to know women on that platform, and to be able to see their locales and the places where they work through their lenses, through their drawing language, through the literary language in which they articulate their world through, you know, even languages that I don't understand. I always find it really interesting to translate languages on Google Translate, because it's always so inaccurate. But I find that so beautiful, because, you know, that beauty of certain things not being translatable, and that one has to step into one's language in order to be able to access that kind of frame, that kind of perspective. I think a platform like that affords us that. It affords us the capacity to not necessarily bend ourselves to make sense. And there's a degree of the audience needing to step into the ways that we are present, you know, in these really beautiful ongoing ways. And so there's a sense of education about the platform as well, about introductions to the ways that one is able to step into the lives and the works of others in order to understand worlds through perspectives that might not necessarily be these fundamental, prioritized, centered perspectives, but to, in a sense, establish a democracy of frames, a democracy of gazes. I think is a really beautiful thing, and it's a significant thing, I think, for architecture. And I think it perhaps overlaps and resonates with what Zinga and Christine was speaking about around, you know, who's a kind of registered architect versus who makes space. Because, you know, if you're making sense of you know, who kind of regulates and gets to call themselves an articulator and make up space versus who's constantly negotiating it, who's constantly determining it, and so on, you really see such an incredibly rich vocabulary that is so present and continues to evolve, and is so malleable, and is such a rich creative terrain. And for me, I find that the possibility that this platform presents is that form of practice, that form of, I mean, I also just appreciate being able to, you know, refer to the platform to my students as references. It's such a beautiful thing, you know, especially I think as a student, I found it so incredibly difficult to find any sort of references that deeply resonated with me. It almost felt quite mechanical to get precedence, you know, for the purpose of remaining productive, you know, in the ways that I was required to. And so it's really beautiful to be able to have a platform that that offers several gazes. And I mean, I'm even kind of tentative to call it a gaze, because, you know, gaze sometimes has been about this fundamental orientation at the expense or absencing of something else. And so it's maybe not necessarily a gaze, but an orientation, or, you know, a myriad of orientations that I think is really beautiful. Anna?
Thank you, Teresa. Yeah, this question of the future it's always an interesting one. And, you know, the truth, of course, is we have no idea. And, you know, we developed this platform, as Patti said, leaving it kind of, you know, as open as possible, precisely because we really have no idea what it could become, but to try and leave as much room for it to become, for it to develop in whatever way is, you know, in whatever way it's pushed by the people who use the platform. So that's, you know, that is really the key, is that once this platform is sort of live and handed over to the public, it's really going to be defined by how people use it and how people want to show up on it. And this, to me, is, we just don't know. We don't know what people will find when they go to this platform. And it's a real act of discovery. And in some ways, that is really the impetus behind it, is that for hopefully all those who do discover the platform, it also becomes an act of discovery as they use it and as they define it for themselves. So I think the aspiration is that it will be a place where people can define it for themselves, as opposed to being something that defines people. I think if that happens, so that every time you go to the platform, it seems like a completely different place, then I think, you know, it would have been quite successful. And I think that the fundament of that is that it's sort of a confrontation with reality. And of course, that is not something that can be dictated. I mean, it simply is. A confrontation with reality simply is. But in that confrontation with reality, there's sort of an act of removing the subject, or removing subjectivity, or removing meaning to remove an idea. So an idea of what somebody should be, an image of what somebody should be, because obviously a lot of discrimination and racism and things that we experience begin with an image. So the idea is to eliminate that, right from the beginning, eliminate this idea, this image, this subjectivity, and to have something, a situation without preconceived ideas or concepts of what something or somebody should be. And within that, if you take away that, then you really don't know what you will find, you know. So it is this act of discovery, and that's what, personally, that's what I'm hoping will become the sort of the sensibility of the site, will become this act of discovery for those who do find it. And that rather than dealing with a subject or a preconceived scene, that people are confronted with, or people are bringing in their conditions, you know, the conditions that they practice under, the conditions that they work under, the conditions, and that this platform will allow the users to try to see their own condition, rather than have that condition put upon them, thrust upon them, or defined for them. So it will be sort of a confrontation with reality of the realities of one's condition, and the here will be an opportunity for one to be able to see one's condition without having all of these sort of external definitions of that. And in that sense, I keep coming back to this word of it hopefully being, as it evolves and morphs, that it becomes or continues to be a place of continued discovery for those who use the platform, and I hope that we will, whatever role we continue to play in it, that we'll be able to keep refining that, I guess, to keep accommodating that more and more and more, and really resisting it becoming some sort of reified object or something, fixed in place that's always sort of predictable, and where you always know what you're getting. So in terms of its sort of future life, it's more a sort of description of conditions of how we hope that, or how I hope that it will operate for people, how it will perform for people, how it will allow people to make discoveries about themselves, about their conditions, about their own confrontation with reality.
Okay, it's been wonderful. I think we have to wrap up, and I don't know how to do that without, just passing the word and the word again, and continue to listen to your thoughts and your wonderful ideas and concerns. So I hope that we could take this discussion. I'm sure we'll take this discussion further and further in various platforms. And I hope that we do make use of the Her, Here, Otherwise platform to experiment, really to experiment and to discover, as Anna says. So please share abundantly, generously, as I know you are, with everyone and anyone that wants to be part of this discussion. Please share also with us any concerns, any ideas, any agreements, disagreements, whichever way it is operating or functioning. You could do it directly to us or through the platform. But I would like to really thank you very, very much for your willingness to show up. It's always, it takes a lot of generosity to show up to these platforms. And first of all, we want to recognize that, or I want to recognize that. I will pass on the word to anyone who wants to use the next couple of minutes. We don't have much more time.
You will meet in Accra, in Ghana, quite soon.
Yes.
That is worth mentioning that.
Yes, it's worth mentioning for us. We have not all met throughout this year and a half or century and a half in COVID years. And it has been an intention of us to come together physically, to break through these screens of technology that has allowed us to meet up, but also restricts our possibilities of coming and breaking bread together. So it was our intention. It was our intention to have a workshop and to meet throughout this process in ways to inform our decision making for the platform, and it didn't come through. But we are able to meet at the end in Accra and connect to women in Accra. We want to kind of counter this digital space, which has afforded us a lot, but also to have the opportunity to go somewhere, to be with each other and to connect with women on the ground. So we're going to be going to Accra at the end of November, approximately. The dates to be determined soon. And I wanted to share that it will be another moment for Here, Her, Here, Otherwise. So Her Here will be in Accra. Anyone else who wants to say any words, any supports, any criticisms. We welcome all of it.
Well, thank you. From Art Con Rêve, it's just thank you.
Thank you, Fabrizio.
Yeah,
thank you for.
I go for that. I go for it, Petit. Well, I just wanted to also add, you know, those things. I think thank you to Saison van Van. Thank you as well to Art Con Rêve, and you know, particularly Fabrizio, who I at least worked with mostly. I think your sense of continued level-headedness, future thinking, patience, entertaining, absolutely all the different forms that the project was kind of formulating and bringing forward. There was a generosity about the way that you engage the process. And so, yeah, I'd just like, I think, from our team to extend a really warm thank you and deep gratitude. And also to, I mean, I'm not going to remember all the names, but also Taba, you know, just everyone behind the scenes also that really made this platform come together. Thank you. And thank you again to Say Yes, Patty, amazing, Anna, amazing, Morena, amazing. Thank you.
I want to say the same, if I can take the word a little minute. First of all, congratulations, because it's an amazing platform. So when Patty called me and then I got to explore this platform, it was nothing like I've ever seen before. And I feel like what Anna said is really true. We don't know what it's going to become because it has so much potential. So meeting you girls today was amazing. You also, Fabrizio, I'm not excluding you. And meeting so many talents and being to connect, I think this is something that's very important. So thank you and congratulations to all of you for being such amazing people.
Patty, you have the last word. Come on. Don't cry.
No, I did my emotional crying. I'll cry later. But I know thank you seems to be the preferred word and the necessary word here. Deep gratitude. It's been really tough times for everyone. Acknowledging those who we've lost in the last year. And Gaia here, you'll relate to that. And acknowledging also the incredible generosity that it is to question architecture and to question this profession that is so dear to us, but it is so violent at the same time and has been violent to our peoples and to us and to our knowledge systems. So again, just gratitude, Fabrizio, also for coming into the process at a very important moment. And provoking us at times, and welcoming, and also knowing your role in this and your position. So that is important to mention. So gratitude to everyone, and please explore the platform. Please continue these discussions. Acknowledgement to the incredible work that each one of you does. Really incredible. Mind-blowing work that Gabriela does, that Hahelo does, that Tulisa does, that Mawena does, that Christine, Nzinga, and Anna do. Really very inspiring, quite a force to guide me personally and the future architects that we are responsible at this particular moment for in some way or another. So just gratitude and acknowledgement. Thank you.